Блин. That's a way to start the stream.
My name is Corey, and I've spent a lot, and I mean a lot of time camping, hiking, and before the video begins, I'd like to state a few things. This video contains some very disturbing and violent stories coming from emergency workers such as EMTs, paramedics, firefighters, 911 operators, etc. I ask that you please respect them in the comments, as these were very traumatic experiences for them. I hope that this video spreads awareness on how hard their jobs are and has some lessons for you to take with you. If you can't handle extremely gruesome stories, this may not be the video for you. That being said, let's begin. Number 1. Law enforcement / EMT here. There was a family of 4 in the car. Mom driving, teenage daughter in the front seat, grandma and 5-year-old son in the back. The mom was texting and driving and didn't notice a huge sweeping curve in the road.
Hello.
Went head on, driver to driller 18-wheeler without either of them having time to touch the brakes. My partner arrived a minute before me, and the first thing I saw upon arrival was him crying, carrying the lifeless 5-year-old boy away from the car covered in all kinds of fluids. I approached what remained of the vehicle's passenger side, and there was blood and brain matter all over. The mom, who was the driver, was just pieces. Completely severed arms still trapped between the steering wheel and dash/hood and engine. The grandmother was pinned behind her, broken back and neck, internally decapitated. Only the teenage daughter in the front seat survived, which is how we determined the mom was texting and driving. I've responded to a lot of gross and gruesome things, but this was easily the most disturbing. My daughter was the same age as the little boy, and I will never shake the image of his sad, lifeless body and my partner crying while carrying him away. like other of my wife. I'll be in the backyard when you get here. And then he hung up. Turns out, his wife was terminally ill and she wanted to die, so he shot her. Then he walked into the yard to shoot himself because he couldn't live without her. This was both the most romantic and tragic thing I've ever heard. Number 3. Paramedic here. It's like 11:30 at night and we get a call for a pregnant lady experiencing cramps and vaginal bleeding. Great. We get on scene and we find this lady standing in her driveway, shaking, pale, and altered. She wouldn't answer any of my questions and no one else was around. I figured she lost a lot of blood, and once we got her in the ambulance, I used a Doppler to listen for fetal heart tones. Nothing. I told my partner that I was going to check inside to see if anybody else was in there, so I grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the open garage. I noticed a lot of blood trailing inside, so I followed it, turning on house lights as I go. It led me through the garage, the kitchen, the living room, and into the bathroom where the only light in the house was already on. I called out, "Paramedics, anyone here?" No answer. I open the bathroom door and I see the blood trailing towards the toilet. Right next to the toilet was a miscarried 28 to 32 week fetus. It smelled horrible and I suddenly felt really freaked out. I remembered that mothers tend to still require bonding time with their kid after a miscarriage, so I picked the kid up and put the body in the bag. Then I returned to the ambulance. Once inside, my partner had started fluids on the patient and I told him what I had found. We decided to just hit the road and get her to the hospital and en route. She didn't say anything for a while. Finally, the mom looked at me and simply and quietly asked if she could have her baby. I said of course and handed her the dead fetus, still in the bag. She teared up and held it tight for the rest of the trip. I just sat there, quietly observing her vitals and holding her hand. Number 4. Passengers, keep your seatbelts on and your feet on the floor. Seriously, this is the only call I've ever projectile vomited on. There was a husband driving and his wife was in the passenger and her feet were in a squatting position on the dash when they were rear-ended and shoved into a boat trailer. Her left femur turned to powder when it made contact with her left shoulder, shattered both her tib and fib. Also, her scapula and her leg actually ended up looping over her shoulder and her foot and ankle was resting between her back and the seat rest. At first, I thought it was a scarf. I was wrong. Her right knee managed to get shoved back directly into her jaw and knocked out all of her teeth, shattering her jaw and splitting it in 2 directions. Her tongue and major mouth and neck muscles were halfway swallowed and then attempted to be thrown back up again. My partner's in the back seat holding her head still while I'm throwing a collar on her, planning a tracheotomy to help her breathe. I'll never forget her eyes and head shaking, like everything in her was trying to reboot and figure out what the fuck just happened. We were trying to punch a breathing hole, but her hyoid bone was fragmented everywhere. We all kinda sat there for a second trying to make her comfortable as she had some last thrashes and passed. EMTs worked their asses off while trying to get you to the ER. We pretty much just drag you out of the car, secure you in the ambulance, and get going. Your best chance is our speediness. But with her, she didn't even look human. We tried CPR, we tried AEDs. Every time we touched her, she responded with bubble wrap sounds of shattered rib cages, neck filled with blood, bone, and sinew, and her legs are still wrapped all over herself. We never got her breathing again, and she was pronounced dead on arrival. That was the call that made me quit. She looked like my mom, or what I guess she looked like if she was in one piece. Number 5. I wanted to tell this story because there's a lesson to be learned from it. I luckily didn't respond to this one, but my FTO did. So there's a husband and wife at home cooking. Wife dumps boiling water all over the front of her lap. Husband panics, throws her into his truck, and goes flying to the hospital. He's going approximately 80 in a 50 late at night. He crests a small hill and his truck leaves the pavement ever so slightly, so he swerved. He can't brake and he slams into the back of a dump truck attempting to make a turn. Wife dies instantly, head is caved in by the corner of the dump truck's bumper. I had the horrible pleasure of seeing the wreckage of the truck every day in our impound yard as we investigated the incident. The husband got charged with manslaughter, and I don't know what happened with that. But on top of dealing with killing his wife, he was a wreck. Moral of the story, never attempt to drive someone to the hospital like that unless it is an imminent life or death. Call an ambulance. First responders are trained to drive at a high rate of speed and can stabilize a patient. Number 6. This was when I was still on placement for being a paramedic. We got sent to a sketchy hotel / low-income building for a check the welfare, funny smell coming from the room. So we get to the dodgy apartment and head upstairs to the room with the little Chinese landlord. On the way down the hall, the smell hit you. Like a dead rotting flesh kind of smell. So we get to the room, landlord unlocks the door. The door won't open, so he had to body check the door open. There was knives jammed into the door frame to keep the door wedged shut, which we thought was a little sketchy. We decided to wait for the police before we entered the room. So we're waiting and we could see that the bathroom is right next to the entrance and there's a tap running. So me and my partner basically say fuck it, let's go check it out. So we head into the apartment, drug paraphernalia everywhere. We turn into the bathroom, find the bathroom sink that was running and a lady in the bathroom. She is green, like Hulk green, bloated, skin rotting, smells like death, clearly had been dead for at least a week. That was definitely one of the most memorable, disgusting calls I've ever been on. Number 7. Firefighter here. I once responded to a vehicle versus 18-wheelers accident, where the car pulled out in front of the truck, which was going approximately 70 miles per hour. The car caught fire afterward. Dispatch initially called it out as a vehicle fire, and when we arrived, it looked like a car had exploded in the middle of the 5-lane highway. We pulled the passenger out upon arrival, and I vividly remember my captain spraying him down with the hose because he was burning. He likely died upon impact, but everything except for his right arm, which had been out the window, was severely burned. My engineer, who pulled him out, said on first grab he felt the skin give away all the way to the bone. That's how badly the passenger was burned. After the accident and the fire, all that remained of the driver was a pile of human parts melted into what remained of the seat and driver floorboard. It was unrecognizable until the coroner started trying to pull it out and I saw some ribs. Part of the driver's face had been cut off upon impact, and it was laying in the roadway among the assorted car parts. It still had hair. The whole thing haunted me for a long time. Hey everyone, I'm doing a live stream on the 16th, so make sure you turn notifications on by clicking the bell near the subscribe button so that you don't miss. This is a compilation of some of the creepiest, classic, true scary stories. This is a collection of some of the scariest and most interesting stories from the internet. I've never read any of these on my channel, but if you've heard any of these, I will be leaving timestamps for each story in the description and pinned comment just in case you want to skip past any. Now that that's out of the way, I hope you enjoyed the video and let's begin. This took place 10 years ago when I was a freshman in college. This is the first time I've ever recounted this story in full detail to anyone. I attended college in a rural mountain area in the Northeast, a small school tucked away in the rolling hills of the mountains, the type of place where the beauty and casual grace of nature is juxtaposed by the ugliness of humanity. The newspaper was ultra-conservative, and you couldn't go too deep into the woods beyond a few trees without seeing some trace of meth activity. You know the type of place I mean. Anyway, one of my new friends from college discovered somehow an abandoned train trestle deep into the woods about 5 miles from campus, basically in no man's land. I have no idea and don't remember how he found this place because it was very much off the path. The trestle crossed above a river which placidly flowed about 40 feet below. It was actually quite beautiful, and we began going there maybe 3 times a week. Just hanging out on the trestle, watching the water below and the open sky above. We'd drink 40s there, smoke a bowl there, bring some girls there, you know, stuff like that. Eventually, we began jumping off the trestle into the water below and then climbing back up. It was just a very college-y thing to do. Our chill spot, basically. So, one day, just needing to get away from the dorms and away from it all, I decided to go by myself to the trestle for a swim. It was about 7 p.m., so I still had a good hour or so of dim sunlight, and I brought a flashlight for the walk home when I was sure it would be dark. I made the trek through the pathways of the woods as I had done 100 times before, left my towel and flashlight on the trestle, and jumped into the water. The water was about 10 to 15 feet deep, I'd say. It flowed almost imperceptibly. You might as well be swimming in a stagnant pool. However, about maybe 50 yards away from the trestle, the river narrows and the current picks up significantly. Then about 20 yards after that, there is a maybe 20-foot high waterfall that bubbles and splashes with extreme violence. We used to watch large objects go over and never come back up again. So there I am, dimly bobbing my head in and out of the water, doing underwater flips, etc. When I pop my head out of the water, I happen to glance to the side of the river and see a man walking towards the water. The water is kind of impeding my view, so I don't see him fluidly walking towards the water. I more see him in different stages of being closer to the water, like flipping through a flip book. He's 15 feet away, 10 feet away, 5 feet away. I can barely give you a description. Maybe 6 feet tall, pale, skinny, black hair pulled back in a ponytail. What I do remember most about his appearance was the extremely empty look on his face and in his eyes, like he was doing something mundane, like taking out the trash or raking leaves. I'm treading water, not knowing what to think, and I see that he is no longer beside the river. He dove in, and he's swimming pin straight directly at me so fast. I try to swim the opposite way, but within a minute I feel him grab my ankle and tug. I tried to scream, but water filled my mouth. While I'm underwater, he lets go and goes up for air, then grabs back on and pulls me again. It seems like he's done this before, and I never once saw him after he jumped into the water. He's gradually pulling me to where the current picks up before the waterfall. I start to realize this and just start fucking flipping out. I'm kicking, screaming, cursing to no effect. Finally, I feel the current start to take me and I twist away towards the waterfall. I look back and I see this fucking guy just casually swimming back to where he jumped into the water, not even looking at me. This is by far the scariest moment of my life as I approach the waterfall. Long story short, I go over and I'm underwater for a long time, over a minute. The water above unrelentingly pushing me under. The only reason I survived was there was a large log that had gone over, and I grabbed it and used a leverage against the bottom to push me away from the crushing water. I survived, obviously, but then I had to trek the miles back to my dorm in the dark without my flashlight, every step of the way thinking he would come back to finish the job. The next year, a football player drowned going over that fall. The news said it was because there was an extreme current due to the recent rainfall, but I've always wondered about that. Before I start, here's a bit of context to my story. My husband and I lived in a small 2-floor house with 2 main entrances, one along the front and the other on the side of the house, which opens up into the laundry room. When we're too busy or it's too late to walk our dog, we hook his collar onto a long line that's attached to one of the pipes on the corner of our house so that he could use the bathroom. We used to do this from the door in our laundry room, but we noticed the large step from the door to the ground had been taking a toll on his hips. As a result, we started letting him out through the front door instead, since the porch is much closer to the ground. This particular night, I was home alone with my dog, and it was around midnight when I decided to let him outside one last time before going to bed. I hook him up to his line, close the door, and lock it before heading into the kitchen to put away the dishes. This was pretty routine. Even if he used the bathroom quickly, he liked to walk around along the front and side of the house for a few minutes before coming back inside. As I'm putting away the dishes, I hear a scratch on the door, which is how my dog signals that he wants to come back inside, so I head over to let him back in. Since I've watched way too many scary movies, I always look through the door's peephole before opening the door. Out of habit, I look to check that my dog is in front of the door. Instead, I see a man staring very intently at the door handle. I freeze with my hand on the door handle. I don't know how much time went by, but then I heard another scratch, this one louder than the last. This kind of wakes me up from my initial shock, and I run to grab my cell phone. I call my husband to tell him what's happening. He was very confused. I probably wasn't explaining the situation very well, but he says that he's heading home. This is when I realize my dog is still outside with this person. I head back to the front door, trying to make as little noise as possible to check whether the stranger is still there. Just like before, he's standing there, head bowed, looking at the doorknob. I tiptoe over to the laundry room and slowly open the door as quietly as possible. I can't see my dog anywhere, and the side of my house is covered in gravel, so I knew I couldn't step outside without making a lot of noise. With my heart still pounding in my chest, I go to the front door to keep an eye on the stranger and to get a better look at him. I considered calling the police, but I didn't feel like they would take me seriously, since all this man was doing was standing in front of my house. I tried taking a picture of him with my cell phone, but my camera was only able to take pictures of the peephole and not the images behind the glass. All of a sudden, the man looks up directly at me. I swear he knew I was there. He glares at me, then opens his mouth to show his taunting, malicious grin. He stood there that way for a few seconds. With that, he turns around and starts to walk down the street. I stay in the same place, almost expecting him to rush back and start pounding on the door. But luckily, my husband got back after a few minutes. Long story short, he convinced me to call the police, and we went out looking for our dog. It turns out that this man had cut the end of the line connected to the pipe, and our dog decided that this was a good time for him to explore my neighbor's backyard, which was where we found him. It's been 3 years since this happened, and we've since moved to a new house for unrelated reasons, and the police weren't able to come up with any suspects. Ever since then, we take our dog on very long walks before the sun goes down. This happened in the fall of 1993 when I was 20 years old. In the interest of context, this was before I started college, and I was working in the material prep department of a plastics factory on the night shift. I was the only woman in the department, and my male coworkers were initially skeptical that I could handle the job. But I proved myself and earned their respect. It was hard work, but on the plus side, it put me in the best shape of my life. It was also about the same time that I dumped my abusive boyfriend. He was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive, as well as an alcoholic. This fact, more than anything, is probably why I got myself into this situation in the first place. I had just gotten off work, and it was about 1:30 a.m. My car was practically running on fumes, so I stopped at a local gas station to fill up. While I was pumping gas, a woman about my age approached me looking nervous and scared. She said that she'd been at her boyfriend's house and that they'd gotten into a fight. She said she'd walked to the gas station to use the payphone and call a friend to pick her up. On her way to the station, a car pulled up as she was walking, and the guys inside started catcalling and harassing her. With a slight movement of her head, she indicated a car that was parked off to the side by the gas station dumpsters. I saw a large, light green car like a Caddy or Lincoln, with at least 2 or 3 shadowy figures inside. She said they threatened her and that she was too scared to call her friend and wait. The woman was neat, well-dressed, and didn't seem high or drunk or anything like that. She just seemed really nervous and freaked out, so I didn't even hesitate. I finished pumping my gas and told her to hop in the car and that I'd take her home. At that time on a weeknight, there was very little traffic, so I booked it right out of the gas station and asked her where she lived. She kept twisting around in the seat to see if the car was behind us. And when I asked her to put her seatbelt on, she ignored me and kept looking for the car. I assumed she was just scared. A few blocks down the road, however, I noticed she was looking around the car, and she started asking me about money, saying things like, "Where's your purse? Where's your bag? I need money. You need to give me some money." My stomach sank. I have this woman in my car, and now she's gonna rob me. Fuck. But when I thought about it, robbery just didn't make much sense. I was driving a 1985 Chevette, affectionately nicknamed Shitbox, and was wearing my work clothes, a ratty t-shirt and jeans with combat boots. I did not look like a person with a lot of cash, primarily because I wasn't a person with a lot of cash. She twisted around in the seat again and started yelling, "There they are," over and over again. She didn't sound scared anymore. I checked the rear view and sure enough, the light green car is right behind me. She started cackling and bouncing up and down in the seat. "My boys are gonna fuck you up, bitch. They're gonna fuck you up." She's laughing like crazy, opening the glove box, looking in the back for a bag or purse, and telling me all this messed up shit these guys are planning to do to me. Now, if I had been smart, I would have just driven to the police station. Actually, if I had been very smart, I would have just called the cops from the gas station and waited with her until they arrived. That would have been the intelligent thing to do. Unfortunately, none of this crossed my mind until later. In the moment, I just got really fucking angry. I realized 3 key things all at once. 1, there was an intersection up ahead with cars on either side waiting to cross, and the light had just turned yellow. 2, I had a spare box cutter that I kept for work in the driver's side door compartment. 3, the crazy bitch still hadn't put on her seatbelt. I didn't think. I floored it and passed under the yellow light just as it turned red. I glanced back to see if the green car was still behind me, but the cross traffic at the intersection had started to move, and they hadn't caught up. The bitch started yelling. I slammed on the brakes and she hit the dash and windshield with a solid and viciously satisfying crack. When she rebounded to the passenger seat, I had the box cutter in her face and was screaming some seriously bat-crazy shit. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was something along the lines of, "Get the fuck out! Get the fuck out of my car before I cut off your face and make you eat it, bitch!" The crazy screaming and box cutter combo worked. She grabbed blindly at the handle and popped the door open, and I started shoving and punching her until she tumbled out of the door to the curb. I stomped on the gas, got to the next turn, and squealed around it with the passenger door still open. I made a few more turns because I was afraid that the green car might catch up to me. After a little while, I stopped to close the passenger door, and then I cut across town and got on the highway to get home. I was only on the highway for about 5 minutes before the shake started. I pulled off to the shoulder to calm down and get my shit together, and then I drove home.
You!
I told my older sister, who I had been living with temporarily after the whole breakup thing, everything that happened.
Fuck!
She wrapped me in a tight bear hug
asshole.
while simultaneously yelling about how stupid I was for not going to the police. I've never been so glad to be yelled at in my life. To give some explanation and background knowledge for this whole encounter, I was around 15 at the time this occurred. I was camping out in the middle of nowhere with my family and part of my extended family, my aunt, uncle, and cousins. I was the oldest kid there in the RV, so you can probably understand how it felt to have no one else there to do the stupid crap I did back then with. With a good 2-year gap between me and the inferiors, it was almost like nirvana when I got to the campground and met the other teenagers. These were all people we knew fairly well from previous camping trips, so it was considered normal to hit it off with them from the start. and act like we've known each other forever within the hour. Now, this story. So, my parents trusted me a lot. I liked my fun, but I liked getting home in time for dinner equally as much. So when I was gone most of the day with other people from the camp, they didn't think much of it. The only rule was that I had to be back at the RV to eat dinner, and before 8:30 p.m. So picture this, right? Group of 6 teenagers, 15 to 16 years old, out in the middle of the woods with no adult supervision for the vast majority of the day. Just a recipe for success right there. But this particular day, we found a neat little deer trail we hadn't found in the 2 years we'd been there before. On second thought, though, it didn't really seem like a deer trail. It snaked through a really thick part of the underbrush, maybe a foot of clear ground, and 3.5 feet clear of branches going upwards. It's a really hard thing to pick out of the brush, unless you're either really looking or know where it is. It was promptly explored, marked with a broken branch outside of the entrance, and quickly forgotten. Except I remembered this special little tunnel. That night, while we were all eating dinner, one of the adults proposed that we played manhunt out in the woods at night. Not everyone was totally on board with this idea, but in the grand scheme of the plan, they were quashed down like autumn leaves. Everyone got a flashlight, and everyone was assigned to a team. For those of you who aren't sure what manhunt is, here's an explanation. Everyone playing is given a flashlight, and they're divided into 2 groups. It's basically like glorified flashlight tag, but there's a catch. As you find people, you have to correctly identify who they are. And if you can, they join forces with the hunters. The last man standing gets a candy bar or something, whatever is being offered as the prize. That's how we played it anyway. For the first round, I get lumped in with the runners, those who are getting chased by the hunters. We get a 5-minute head start to run, climb a tree, whatever the hell we want to do to evade the hunters. Usually I'm the one up in the tree, but that never really worked out as being the winning Usain Bolt, trying to keep my jello-like legs to move me away from whoever was behind me was like trying to run on water. It felt like an eternity, but I finally reached the main trail running back to the camp and sprinted down it screaming bloody murder. Confused faces looked out from the trees and I think someone called after me. Reaching the camp was easy, but trying to explain why I woke up half the people in the camp and bolted out of the woods at breakneck speed was harder. When I finally choked the words out to explain, I remember a profound, insidious silence throughout the group of adults waiting at the mouth of the trail. I really don't remember a whole lot from that point on. I do know that the cops were called and my mother and aunt ran shrieking and wailing along the trail, calling for the other kids to come back to safety. When someone's yelling like that, you don't ignore it. They rounded everyone up in 30 seconds flat and barreled back into the camp. The police found a man out in the woods, creeping along the trail, clutching a knife. A black garbage bag with a plethora of sharp objects and a saw was found abandoned on the trail, somewhere speckled and smeared with dried blood. I don't think there's really any getting over it. I still have nightmares sometimes of the man chasing me, breathing heavily down the back of my neck, trying to catch me. Sometimes he succeeds. So, this is a story that happened to my mom's friend in Korea about 10 years ago. Every time I hear this story, I still get the chills. My mom's friend lived in an apartment complex in Seoul, South Korea. She was a stay-at-home mother with a young daughter, and her husband worked during the day. One day, she was coming home from running errands with her daughter and got onto the elevator in her building. When she got on, she noticed that there was a man wearing a cap and a yellow raincoat, and he kept his head low so that she couldn't really see his face. She immediately felt really uneasy, and she made her daughter stand to her side, furthest away from the man. What made her feel even more uncomfortable was that when she pressed the button for her floor, there was no other lit number. And on top of that, she noticed that he was carrying something wrapped inside newspaper close to his side. Things started to click in my mom's friend's head, and she started to panic and decided to take out her cell phone and pretend like she was calling home to her husband, who was obviously really not at home and at work. She started saying things like, "Oh, I'm on the elevator and about to get off. Can you get the door for me?" And making it seem like her husband was waiting for her at home. When the elevator did reach her floor, I think she lived on the 12th floor or something, she quickly got off, grabbed her daughter, and started to walk as fast as she could to her apartment. She noticed that the man also got off on her floor and was slowly following her down the hallway. When my mom's friend got to her door, she started to bang on it and was shouting things like, "Hey, I'm home, please open the door," and kind of pretended like her husband was coming to answer the door. Upon seeing this, the man in the yellow raincoat started to walk away back towards the elevator. When he seemed to be far away enough, my mom's friend quickly picked up her daughter and slid open her door's passcode thing. This is usually how people get into their homes in Korea. And she started to frantically put in her key code. But the problem was that the buttons would make noise, so the man knew that no one was going to answer the door for her. And he turned around and started to run back towards her. My mom's friend, at this point, was practically screaming, and when she finally got her door to open, the first thing she did was throw her daughter in through the door. When she got in herself, she saw that the man was pretty much inches from the door, but she managed to shut it and lock it before he could wedge his hand or a weapon into the door. Afterwards, looking through the door's peephole, she saw that the man was walking away back towards the elevator. Several months later, my mom's friend was watching the news, and there was a coverage on the capture of a serial killer named Yoo Young-chol, who used to kill a lot of prostitutes. She told my mom that she could never forget the dread she felt when she saw the too familiar yellow raincoat and hat that he was wearing when apprehended. So that's switch, but I could already see this was some sort of IT setup. There were flashing LEDs all around the place and the sort of hum you hear when a hard drive is working hard. When we finally switched on the lights, we could see a sophisticated, albeit somewhat cluttered office setup. There were hard drives the size of bar fridges and other computer equipment lining the walls, sometimes piled 2 or 3 high, and plastic storage boxes scattered around the far wall and several desks with computer monitors arranged in the middle, complete with rolling office chairs. At this point, I felt like I was in one of those nonsensical dreams. This made absolutely no sense. We wandered into the middle and sat down at one of the desks to see if the computers would give us any idea of what the hell was going on here. My heart was racing and I just wanted to bolt. We had been seen by the CCTV, so if anyone was monitoring, they would know that we were here. Jeremy, on the other hand, was adamant that we had to get to the bottom of this. So I put on a brave face and started looking through the computer. This went on for a while, but in short, neither of us had a very high grasp of technology outside of Facebook and Microsoft Word. The best I can describe it from my lay position is that it was endless lists of computer talk. It was like what the old Napster or LimeWire download screens looked like. Just constantly picking up and receiving data, then recording it on several windows. I gave up on the computers and walked cautiously over the far end of the container to the big pile of storage boxes. By then, I was pretty sure no one else was there, as there was nowhere to hide, really. But I was still incredibly on edge. I decided, against my better judgment, to see what was inside all these boxes. My brief look through this box still makes me feel sick to my stomach. It didn't take long for me to realize that this box was full of posters, DVDs, and photos, all of hardcore child pornography. One thing that still gets to me is that it was all neatly ordered into folders and smaller boxes. These people were organized. I immediately recoiled, jumped up, and ran over to Jeremy. I could hardly string a sentence together. I said something along the lines of, "Mate, get out, child sex, go, get the fuck up." I dragged him out, composed myself, and managed to explain what I saw. We jumped back into the truck and sped back to the house. The farm had no mobile phone reception, and we hadn't bought the satellite phone, so we had to get back to the landline to call the police. Once we called them, they still had to make it all the way to the farm from the nearest police station, which was in a town about a half hour from the closest town to the farm. As I mentioned before, we were in the middle of nowhere. We waited, talking frantically about what we'd seen, until the cops arrived almost an hour later. They arrived with 2 4-wheel drives and we jumped in and let them back. This is where it gets worse. By the time we got back, the container door was open and there was a fire inside. We only had 2 small extinguishers in the cars, and these did very little. The fire department took an hour to get there, but by then most of the damage was already done. An arson report by the federal police found almost no evidence of the computer equipment described. This means that whoever ran it knew we were there and had time to come and remove most of it and get away. There were various ways to get off the property, and the landmass was huge, so there was no real way to tail them. Since the police hadn't taken us all too seriously in the first instance, probably due to our poor explanation on the phone, aerial surveillance was also impossible by the time we had pieced it all together. I took a keen interest in following it up, but with no real evidence of who might be responsible, the investigation went cold. I've kept in contact with Jeremy, and the shipping container is still sitting there on the farm, as it's too expensive to move. I'll never forget what I saw in those boxes. To give some background information, this event occurred a little over a year ago, and I still haven't been able to even begin to get over it. I'm a 22-year-old 5'4" female, and at the time I was 21. My family and I had recently moved to a new town that was a fair amount more rural than the town I had previously lived in, and our new house was a large ranch-style house with a noticed that I had spotted him. I wanted to scream, but I just covered my mouth and walked back upstairs, leaving my cell phone down there. I was not going to walk over to get it. We didn't have any phones upstairs, so I walked into my room, locked the door, and hid in the closet. I started crying silently and started thinking the worst. He was going to find me and kill me. I just knew it. Then I heard someone coming up the stairs. Heavy footsteps. I felt sick and I had never been so afraid in my life. Then I heard someone open the door to my parents' room, which was 2 rooms away from mine. I then hear police sirens outside and I sounding weird, but my husband is very pretty. I mean, he's handsome, but he's got long, curly black hair and a slight build. And we both look way younger than we actually are. It's made us targets for more than a few weirdos. So we're in line and we're about to pay, and he realizes he left his wallet in the car. The store was pretty much empty and there was no one behind us, so he said that he'll be right back and ran out into the dark parking lot. Now, I'm anxious anyway, so when he was gone for literally 4 minutes, I ran outside to look for him. I saw a black truck with a topper on it driving away under the single street light, and my husband was nowhere in sight. My knees felt like jelly, and I never understood that saying until that moment. I ran to our car praying he was in there, and thank God, or whoever he was. He was sitting in our locked car staring after the truck until I resumed filling sauces again and making sure everything was in working order, until I was abruptly interrupted by banging at the front door. I walked over and noticed a figure right outside the front door. It was the man. I yelled that we were closed and that he would have to come back later. That didn't seem to faze him as he continued to bang on the door. I walked away, figuring that he was just being an asshole, when suddenly I heard a loud crash. I ran to the lobby to see the glass door broken and the man beginning to step inside. I yelled for my manager and told her that we needed to leave through the back door, and we did just that. We booked it to our cars and both called the cops. They arrived in about 15 minutes and came outside the restaurant with a dirty-looking man in cuffs. They said he was hiding in the back janitor's closet with a large knife in his hand. So that's my story, and also the reason I'm never working early mornings again. I've been working at McDonald's now for over 5 years, and this is still my creepiest experience there. This happened 2 years ago when I was 18 and I had been working my first overnight shift on front counter. I usually work in the kitchen on overnights, so I had no interactions with any of the customers until then. I was working from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., which is a usual overnight shift for us. Around 3 a.m., I was making some fries when I noticed a man standing there and trying to take pictures with his cell phone of me and my other female coworker, Rebecca. I pointed it out to her and she just rolled her eyes in annoyance and went to take an order on drive-thru, telling me it happened a lot for people. I was instantly uncomfortable. I wanted to tell the manager, but he was in the office doing his manager stuff and I really didn't want to bother him. I went over with what felt like a nervous smile and quickly did my usual greeting. Hi, what can I get for you? He just kind of looked at me and stayed quiet. He was about 5'8", white, early 20s, medium build with dark hair and brown eyes. An average man, I would say, but something about his piercing glare made me feel super uncomfortable. Then he smiled a smile that sent shivers down my spine. I'll just have a coffee black, sweetie, he said, and I could instantly smell the alcohol in his breath. I nodded and told him the price before he pulled out a $5 bill and went to hand it to me, making sure our hands touched. I avoided his gaze and went to hand back his change when he winked and went to go wait for the coffee. I went to go make it as fast as I could, but just my luck, we were out of coffee at both the front counter and the drive-thru, as we don't sell much through the night. I turned around and kept as little eye contact as I could. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to brew you a fresh pot. Should only take about 3 minutes. Don't worry, I don't mind. I have quite the view while I wait, he replied, shooting me a wink, and I just smiled awkwardly and looked away. I still staring at me. I didn't know whether or not I should tell Jake about it at this point. He was facing me, so he couldn't see her, and I also thought I was being paranoid at first. But at this point, red flags were now definitely going off in my head. The woman didn't even have anything in front of her to eat. There was just a coffee cup on her tray, which was clearly empty. She was wearing a bright pink jacket and had a big stain on the right shoulder, dark blue glasses that made her eyes look huge. A few minutes she had killed her husband by poisoning him, and that there was an investigation because it appeared that she had a ritual of